Okay, now I will introduce my first couch. So we've got Mikhail Lansmore, 20 years at Hudson, Ivan Fletcher, 19 years at Hudson, and I'd like to invite Michael Furey up. He is the Managing Director of Delta Research and part of the Hudson Investment Committee. And Alastair Healey, who is the Managing Director of Gilt Investments, Bond Specialist, Fixed Interest Extraordinaire. Now, I'm going to start with Alastair tonight, actually, because bonds have had a shocker. The 2022 was awful for the bond market. I read somewhere the other day, Alastair, was the greatest bond bear market in history, they're saying. Now, some use bonds to predict where the economy might be heading, so I thought it'd be really great to get Alastair in the spotlight tonight and have him give us his thoughts on what might be happening in the economy.
No worries. Thank you for throwing me in the deep end. I guess the fixed income market for me, we deal with clients directly, so we don't talk to funds and anything like that. So we've got to keep an eye on where the yield curve goes. And I'm old school. For me, the yield curve tells you everything. And pretty much the market starts with the interest rates and then it affects the other asset classes. So for me, whilst the fixed income market has had a bad run, but that's only a bad run for those people who bought bonds when they were way too low and artificially put down there by the governments. So, yes, if you buy a bond at 1% and it goes to 10%, you're going to have a shocker. But if you go the other way, or if you stood your ground and stayed short, and you basically had a look around what was going on in the world, then you would have probably been more inclined to stay short. So I know fund managers have always got to, and I'm not a fund manager, but I guess fund managers have always got to be 100% invested, and they're constantly looking to manage their book. Whereas from my position, if someone rang me and said, should I buy a bond a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I would have talked them out of it in 2 seconds. So to me, it was reasonably clear and obvious that rates, it was never going to stay there, because interest rates, cash rate in Australia at 0.1%, is the lowest it's ever been historically, full stop. So there's only one way it's going to go, is up. So it was pretty clear and obvious, I thought. But so for me, it definitely has been bad for some people who have gone long. There was a 100-year bond that was issued, or a number of 100-year bonds that were issued 2 years ago. And I think they're now trading at about $2 because they were issued at 4%, I think, for 100 years. So a lot of people, I guess, it comes down to what you think interest rates are going to do at the time. So you sit there and the market had the view that rates might stay down for a while because there was a lot of problems. If you looked at the European market, 30-year bonds were trading at minus 0.2, which was unheard of in the market. Now, a lot of these things were frontier stuff. It was I guess, a combination of two things. One, the government's trying to force people to invest and start putting money into equities maybe, or doing projects and getting things going, so they kept pushing rates down. But the more they pushed the rates down, I think the market became a bit of a catch-22. People were then worried about what was going to happen in the market. So they kept buying bonds because they wanted to secure their money and tuck it away for safety. So even though a negative bond sounds crazy, and it is crazy, but I guess people were prepared to pay for the sake of holding a government bond, because at the time it could have gone really bad. So I think people were just looking to put it into safety, which was AAA. So for me, the interest rates in the market, the interest rates are the price for money. If there's not much money around, the price will go up. If there's heaps of money around, the price will go down. It's as simple as that. So if the government, the real problem was the government interfering it with ulterior motives, and then everyone just believed the government and believed the Reserve Bank, so they all thought that it was going to stay down there forever. And if you looked at the yield curves, it almost looked like it was going to stay down forever, and they were issuing 100-year bonds. But 8.1% cash rate that was never going to stay there in Australia as well. So it's proven the case, so it's back up.
Alastair, do you think that rates will go up Tuesday, Melbourne Cup? They heading up?
Absolutely, I reckon they're going to go. I mean, I'm probably a bear with a sore head a little bit. I think the elephant in the room here is inflation, and I was, I guess, some of the young bucks' ages when Paul Keating was in power here in Australia, and he freed up the market and introduced a lot of banks. If you go back to that period of time, I think we had an inflation rate of around about 8%. And if anyone can remember what the cash rate was when yes, it was 18%. So, the logic was that interest rates had to be higher than inflation. If you want to get control of inflation, you've got to have interest rates higher than inflation to bring it down. So if you look at it at the moment, our inflation rate got as high as 7.8% just recently, and we've pushed the rates up way up to 4.1. So to me, I look at that as old school, someone who went through the Keating days, and Keating had a massive problem trying to get control of inflation. They couldn't do it. The Banana Republic, this is the recession we had to have, was back then, because they couldn't get inflation down. Inflation would go up and they'd push rates up above inflation and slow the whole economy down. Rates would come down for a little while, and then he'd say, right, we've got it under control, we'll bring rates down. As soon as he brought rates down, inflation would take off again. And that went on for a number of years. So for me, I look at what's happening now, and I think we're exactly in that position again. We all think inflation's under control. Inflation's 5.4, I think, at the moment, and our cash rate's 4.1. If you look around the world, if you go back to prior to 2008, rating, you would think we'd pay the same rate. We had to pay 1.5% over their rate in order to attract money our way. So at the moment, we're 1.4 under theirs. So ours is 4.1, and the American rate is 5.5. So they're the biggest economy in the world, and we're sitting here at 4.1. Our debt is $1 trillion, or rough and dirty around that level. If you go back to when Kevin Rudd got in, we had $90 billion worth of debt. We've now got $1 trillion. I mean, that's equivalent to your mortgage going from $90,000 to $1 million. So for me, of that $1 trillion that we've got, about 40% of it's borrowed from overseas. If we don't dovetail our of the rest of the world saying, look, we love you like a brother or a sister, you let us know when it's not as good as it should be. The risk we've now got, we're not getting the returns we should be getting. So an inflation rate of 8, then that period we made that the Aussie dollar got down to 49 cents to the US. And the reason why it got down to 49 cents to the US is money. As you see the dollar going down, that's because all the offshore investors are pulling their money out. And so we really have to be mindful of that. And the government has to make sure that we don't get a little bit too complacent and let things run a bit and don't worry about it. Because if the Aussie, we saw it just recently, I don't know if people watch the currencies as much, but the Aussie dollar got down to 62, it dipped into the 62 cents and then went back to 64 cents. And for me, there's a number of reasons for that. I think it started to trickle down because of the difference in rates, I would say. And you can never prove this. This is sort of, you just got to watch it, anecdotal sort of evidence. And it floated out and then it stopped and then came back. One of the other things that you should all keep in mind is there's a thing called term funding facility that the Reserve Bank put in place for all the banks. The banks, during COVID, they didn't want any of the banks to get into trouble, so during COVID they provided this funding. This term funding facility allowed the banks to borrow up to 2% of their balance sheet. If they were going to borrow the money, they had to borrow it for 3 years, and the rate they borrowed it at was 0.1. Well, all that money has to be repaid by June. So at the moment, a lot of banks are borrowing money from overseas because they know if they borrow it here domestically, it'll push rates up. So they're borrowing it overseas and then bringing it back, which was part of the reason why the Aussie dollar went from 60, I think, they won't tell me, but for me, the reading between the lines, I think the 62 went back up to 64 cents because the major banks, like the Commonwealth Bank's got to borrow about $60 billion to repay the Reserve Bank by June next year. So I think that some of that money's coming in, which then clouds the whole issue with regards to our interest rates relative to the rest of the world.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Michael sits on the investment committee at Hudson. So there's Michael, Ivan, myself, Melissa, who's an advisor at Hudson, and Isaac, who will be an advisor next year. Isaac's just done BAFE, and he's a graduate working through with us now, and he's formed a very big part of the committee. But Michael is a fairly new addition to Hudson in the last 6 months. We've got Michael on board. Michael and Ivan, Mel and Isaac and myself, we have a lot of robust discussions around the economy, talking about things like bonds, Aussie dollar, unemployment, talking about if Trump gets re-elected next year, what's happening in China. All of these things affect our markets. And then Michael sits with us and we talk about mitigating the risk, talk about opportunities that might come on. Michael, I'm going to handball this to you to talk a little bit about your thoughts on the economy and also how you add value to investment committees.
Okay, so we'll start with our thoughts on the economy. Okay. Thoughts on the economy. Well, I guess from my perspective, I think the primary driver, I guess, around our economy and the rest of the world, if you like, is definitely the American economy. Okay, that is one of our biggest trading partners. Obviously, China's very important to Australia as well, and so in terms of our economy, there's quite a few interesting things going on at the moment that I won't go into too much detail. Okay, so I'll touch on that yield curve. So what is a yield curve anyway? Okay, so it's really what those interest rates are for different terms, right? So we know our cash rate in Australia is 4.1. Our, say, 1 or 2 year term deposit that a government pays is around that. It's around sort of 4.1, 4.2, give or take. But a 10-year term deposit that a government pays is around, it was up near 5%, not only last week, and it sort of dropped a little bit, okay? So that's sort of showing two things, right? With the 1 year around 4.1 and the longer term up around 4.7, 4.8%. Short term, that's showing that rates are probably going to stay where they're at for a little while, okay? That's pretty much the market saying rates are not going to move, they're going to stay high. So the current theme that we're facing in Australia is higher for longer, okay? Now, the reason why rates have gone up, as Alastair's already mentioned, it's about combating inflation, okay? There was a belief, certainly in the USA, and there probably still is a bit to a degree, that rates are going to come down, okay? And there was a bit of that belief in Australia as well. Now the belief is that rates are higher for longer. So that sort of relates to inflation's going to stay higher for longer as well. And I'm on the same page as Alastair insofar. I do believe the Reserve Bank is going to put up rates next week. The market's currently a 50-50 bet. Okay, you go on the website, you look at the ASX rate tracker, they're saying 50% chance that rates are going to go up next week. I think it's going to go up next week because the inflation issue we've got in Australia at the moment is very Australian. Okay, we've got services inflation that's the highest it's been since 2001, and we've got a whole a lot of the other inflation drivers are all sort of quite local. So the Reserve Bank has to battle that inflation and put rates up. Now, what is the consequence of putting rates up? And this happens in America as well, right? The reason why Reserve Bank or central banks put up rates is to intentionally slow the economy. So we've got a pretty good economy at the moment. So I tend to think that the Reserve Bank's pretty focused on slowing the economy. The fact that those 10-year bonds are a little bit higher is a slight positive around the Australian economy, and because it's higher, that's sort of suggesting that, you know, we've got a fragile economy, but there's no sort of signs of recession yet. In America, the 10-year rate is much, much lower than the cash rate and say the 1-year rate. 1-year rate, cash rate's 5.5%, give or take. The 10-year is around 4.6%. It's much lower. That's a signal that their economy could well head to recession. Every time, I think in the last 40 years, that relationship's been, there has been a recession within a couple of years in America. If that happens, that will impact us as well. And so that fragility of our economy is sort of where we're at the moment.
And we talk about that in the investment committee meetings, and we put together asset allocations based on different risk profiles. I'm one end of the aggressive risk profile. I want uranium and
You are. Yeah. You are.
gearing.
Yes.
I need Michael. Michael is conservative and is very good for me. So
That
is
is
Melissa.
true.
It's
That is
actually, yeah. So we have these great discussions now for different age brackets, obviously. Accumulators, which would be anywhere up to about the age of 55. We would try and educate you to be a little bit more aggressive because you've got that time to ride out volatility. Then you've got your pre-retiree, the transitioning, and then of course retirement. Retirement planning is one area where I think everybody needs an advisor. There's innovative products that are always coming to the market. At the moment, there's some really great annuity products. So products are changing, but also the legislation changes. And so with pre-retirees, it's important to plan a few years out. It's to do with planning on the sale of some of your assets, making sure that you're maximising what you put into super each year. But our asset allocations, our weightings change. And in the investment committee, we obviously have different weightings for different risk profiles. I'm going to ask Ivan tonight. Ivan has a lot of retired clients. I wouldn't say it's all he has, but a large part of your clients. So yeah. So Ivan, what's the secret to a healthy and happy retirement?
What's the secret to a healthy retirement? Look, I might stand up. I find it a bit easier to talk standing. Look, it's a great question, and I'm glad you asked, Juanita, because otherwise the next 10 minutes wouldn't work. But it's the age-old question is, you know, what makes for a great, healthy and happy long retirement? Now, healthy, I'm not a doctor. I can't help you with the medical side of things, okay? But long and a happy healthy, it is about doing what we love and what we want, okay? And no one else can help us decide on what that is. And to me, as simple as it is, the concept I always learnt from my father, do the simple things first, Ivan. The simple things is learning you and knowing what you want, okay? And the best demonstration I can give of that is a fable about a fisherman from a Mexican village. So the fisherman from his Mexican village, he's coming home with his morning daily catch, and just so happens, American tourist stumbles across, can't help himself, sees the catch. He says, I see you've got a great catch of fish there. He said, do you mind if I ask how long it took you to catch those fish? And the Mexican villager looks up a little bit stunned. He says, not very long. That wasn't enough for the American tourist. He says, well, why didn't you go out for longer and catch more fish, make more money? The Mexican villager looks back at him and he says, well, this small catch is sufficient to take care of my needs and the needs of my family. That wasn't enough for the American tourist. The American tourist says, look, I've got an MBA from Harvard and I can help you. And before the local villager could interrupt him and say no thanks, he started. He said, first, you've got to go out for longer and catch more fish, all right? And when you catch more fish, you're going to make more money. And when you make more money, you're going to be able to buy a bigger boat. And if you can buy a bigger boat, you're going to catch more fish. and you're going to make more money. And this goes on, and he says, and then you'll get a second boat and a third boat, and pretty soon you'll have a whole fleet of fishing trawlers. And the Mexican villager, a little stunned, but also a little interested, says, and then what? And the American tourist says, well then, he says, you can cut out the market man and the middleman, you can start negotiating with the fish factories yourself, you could create your own fish factory. Then you'll be able to build your whole empire and be able to move it into Mexico City. Or maybe Los Angeles, maybe even the Big Apple in New York. And the Mexican villager looks up, a little frightened, but still a little interested. He says, how long will that take? And the American tourist says, 20 to 25 years. The Mexican villager still a little bit interested. And he says, and then what? And he says, well, the tourist says, what do you do with the rest of your time? You're only out here till 10 o'clock in the morning. And the Mexican villager looks up with a big smile on his face and he says, he said, I sleep a little late, I catch a little fish, I play with the children, I have a siesta with the wife in the afternoon, nudge, nudge, siesta. And then in the evening, I come back into the village and I drink with my friends, I play my guitar, we sing some songs and we play music. And the tourist, he turns around to the American and he says, so what happens next if I go to New York? And the American tourist, he says, well then, he said, this is where it gets really exciting. He said, your company grows so big, you have such a big empire, you're controlling it from New York. And then he said, you list your company on the stock exchange and you sell all the shares and you make millions and millions of dollars. Millions of dollars, you'd be a very rich man. The Mexican, still a little stunned, still a little interested, and he says, and then what? And the American tourist says, then you can retire. So you can move back to the coastal village, you can sleep late, you can do some fishing, play with your children, have a siesta with your wife, nudge, nudge, and in the evening, go into town and play music and drink and enjoy your friends. So the moral of this story is it was not the American tourist that was teaching the Mexican. It was the Mexican teaching the American tourist. Know what you want. You could already be there. In this case, the Mexican villager was already living the life that he wanted. He knew what he wanted, he was already living it. So it was a great lesson. So when we bring that back to financial planning, it's the most common question that I get asked. And the most interesting part is it's not most of my clients that say, how much do I need to retire? It's at the barbecue with friends or strangers that we meet. And they say, oh, Ivan, you're a financial planner. How much do I need to retire? I can't help myself and I go, I don't know. How much do you need to retire? And after the awkward silence, we get to the conversation and says, nobody knows what you want. Okay? There's not a statistical record. There's not a magic article. There's not a Dr. Google that can turn around and tell you what you want for your retirement or what you want for your retirement and how you're going to live. Okay? There's no magic button for you to decide what you want to do. The Mexican villager already knew what he wanted to do. He was doing it. So for retirement planning, we need to have something to aim at. Okay? So my surname is Fletcher. I come from a long line of Fletchers, funnily enough. And the heritage of my family name goes all the way back to England and Scotland. And Fletcher comes from the fletching, which is the pad that stops the bow from slapping on your arm. Okay? If my ancestors were here now, they would say to me, even a good archer needs something to aim at. Okay? So when we want to talk about retirement and how much somebody needs, we need to certainly start with looking and saying what it is that we need personally ourselves. What is it that we want? Okay, and there's really just two simple ways to look at this. There's two lists that everybody can prepare for themselves, okay? For my retired clients that are already here with me, I apologise tonight, they've probably heard this sermon 3 or 4 times. But it's two simple lists. The first list is the budget for what you need for your lifestyle, day-to-day living, okay? We already know what half of that is. We know the rates, we know the household budget, we know the electricity bill, Netflix, etc. But when we stop work, some things change. We might eat more at home, we might save some money. All right? We might use more toilet paper because we're now doing our business at home. But there'll be changes. But the big ticket items is, what do you want to do? Where's your passion? What are you going to do with your retirement? If you can work that out, we can help you plan and map that out. Are you going to be travelling the high seas? Are you going to be on the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans in the cruise ships? Or are you going to be travelling the wilderness, free camping your way around Australia? Or are you going to be home growing pumpkins? Like my dad, he grows pumpkins and raspberries. It's the greatest treat at Christmas is to go home and fight over the raspberries. See? Are you going to be eating caviar at the races? Or are you going to be teaching your grandchildren to fish or to bake a cake? Are you going to be going to the Paul McCartney concert? Anybody here go to Paul McCartney this week? There's a couple. It was a great gig. 81 years old. He's doing what he loves. I don't think he needs a financial planner.
Yes, he does, Ivan.
I couldn't get near him. But what do you want for your retirement? Are we going to be going to these gigs? Or are we going to be going to the theatre? Are we going to the opera? Or are we staying at home and watching Netflix? I don't know what you want, but you do. I don't know what you're going to live for your lifestyle, but you do. And if you put the time and energy into working that through, then we get some traction. So that's your lifestyle budget. You work out and say, how much do I need a year to do the things I do, see the family I want to see and travel? List number 1 complete. List number 2 is what are the big ticket items, and these, I say, can be the game changers. Okay, the biggest one is our family home. In retirement, what happens with a family home? Are we going to sell our big 4 or 5 bedroom house after we become the empty nest syndrome and downsize? Cash some equity in, put it into our retirement kitty, maybe put it into the super? Or are we going to move to a glorious 3-bedroom apartment that one of the property guys is going to sell us later tonight, and we need more money? Or, as a lot of clients say to me, Ivan, I'm not leaving here except in a cardboard box. And I go, well, that's fine. You already know the answer, but do you need to do maintenance? Do you need to do some projects on the house? Do you need a nice hot tub jacuzzi? Do we need to spend money on the family home? So they're the big ticket items. You move on to your vehicles. How often are you going to do a car upgrade? A lot of people don't think about this. Are you going to buy caravans and campers, boats, horses? That one's for you, John, if you're in there somewhere. Then you decide what it is, your lump sum events. Are you going to help children out? Are you going to do overseas holidays? These are all personal things. I don't know what you want to do. You know what you want to do. But if we get that list together, then we can work, and then we have these 2 lists. Then we can start to decide, okay, how much money is needed to get this? We have all the models. We have the help of the likes of Michael and saying, well, this is what the forecasting tells us we can achieve. We can tell you whether Centrelink comes into the factor. Will you qualify for Centrelink? Yes, you might have to wait till your 80s and then it comes into the equation. But we can put that together and model, but it's got to start with what you want for yourself. And that makes it a little bit easy. So when someone asks me what's the secret to financial planning, I say it's just knowing what you want.
Thanks, Ivan. Now, Ivan's worked at Hudson for 19 years and Mikhail is 20 years. So these 2 have worked together for a long time. They often act like siblings. They do. They've been around a long time. Now, Mick has a loyal following. Mick's been running Tuesday Chats for anybody who's aware of Mick. They will know her trademark, some call it a cult following that she has going. Mick probably has the most clients at Hudson and takes the most new referrals on, so you're constantly dealing with new clients. So how do Mick, new client approaches you, wants to have a chat, how do you approach a new client at Hudson? Oh, hopefully.
Hello? Am I on? No? Am I on? Yes. Can I just come back to that now that I've got the mic? The budget, I just want to follow up from Ivan. The budget is the most boring idea, but it is the crux of financial planning. So I would encourage everyone to get out a little spreadsheet. You don't need anything fancy. Spreadsheet, document your income versus expenses.
I'm so opposite. I hate budgets.
But that is the first step.
I
You need
hate
to take
them.
control over where your money's going. My turn.
Sorry.
I also, before I go on, I just want to say hello to everyone in the room, but especially my clients. Because I have, being with Hudson for 20 years, I have had clients that I've been speaking to for millions of years and never actually met them in the flesh. So I've met a few of you tonight and I plan on meeting all of you, which will be very special. And one more shout out, again, because I've got the mic. Shout out to my husband who's not here. We celebrate our 1 year anniversary this month. So thank you. So with Juanita's question about new clients, I get lots of new clients. And one of the questions I'm getting a lot now is about ethical investments. Ethical investments have exploded over the last 5 years, since 2018. They've been around for longer than that, but there was very limited ways you could invest ethically. And there were some barriers, so quite expensive. And some would say you sacrifice the returns investing ethically. Not anymore. So there's a couple, I said that's in the past. There's a couple of different camps with ethical investing. There's ESG and there's impact funds. There's a few others, but they're the two.
ESG, mate? Can you just...
So ESG means environment, social and governance. It's a much larger universe. So companies that are considered ESG can be unethical to some people, but as long as they're showing that they're improving processes and things like that, they can be included in an ESG model.
There's 588 ethical funds out there at the moment, so that's a lot of open-ended funds to go through. Activists, you could be an activist, it could be an impact fund, it could just be a company that employs a lot of women on their board. So there are a lot of things. So
impact funds. So ESG, larger universe. Companies only need to show that they're improving their practices. Impact funds are a lot more specific. There needs to be proven revenue coming from the companies providing solutions to global issues like climate change, clean energy, sustainable transport.
And some of them will include the Magnificent Seven, which is your Alphabet, Tesla.
Tech.
Yeah, the tech, actually.
So Tesla's a good one. Tesla would be considered would be considered in an impact universe because their part of their revenue is trying to change transport and make it more sustainable. A lot of the other tech stocks like Meta, Facebook, that could be included in the ESG universe, but definitely not impact.
I feel like Michael wants to say something over there. He's got the microphone.
ESG investing is it's become trendy because when we're investing, I think society as investors have come to learn that we don't just invest for returns. We can actually invest because we are allocating capital potentially for the greater good, and that's what ESG investing is about. We allocate capital to make a difference on environmental issues. We allocate capital to improve social issues, to, diversity in companies and ensure that they're doing the right thing. Ultimately, I think governance will take over and basically force all companies and what have you to do that. But ESG investing is very much about, allocating capital for the greater good. And I'm with you, Mick, that, there are some good returns to have. That is one of the biggest trends in investing right now, and so where money flows, that's where the returns come as well. So
and do you see too, Michael, with the zero carbon emissions by 2050, a lot of companies that are going to benefit from consulting, and there is a whole lot of government funding going towards these companies that are trying to get to the net zero carbon emissions?
we have to, as a society, like if we believe, and pretty much all the science suggests that, you know, climate change and the disaster that's sort of heading is all man-made, therefore, you know, heading towards net zero by faster than 2050 is an absolute necessity. And so, like I said, the governance, the government rules and everything will ultimately take over and force it. So I think that is just a direction that just has to happen. And I'm sure technology will, you know, improve, and hopefully, you know, I'm like probably most people relying on technology, but certainly the capital that we invest is, you know, if we're going to invest in a term deposit as an example, right? Do we invest in a term deposit with a bank that's, you know, funding some bad behaviour, or do we or we just take a little bit of a cut potentially on the term deposit and invest with a bank that's actually investing for, you know, I guess better behaviours for our, you know, society and our children and what have you. And that sort of relates to potentially the lower investment returns, because those companies, those banks or whoever that are raising the capital to do bad things, well, they have to pay more to entice. And so you can get the higher returns, but it's for the wrong reasons. But so, you know, we are fundamentally investors, we're capital allocators, so that we can actually make a difference. And that's what ESG investing is about.
And I just want to point out the governance issue. So with any fund, with anything gaining popularity, there's always going to be those that do the wrong thing. And in this space, it's called greenwashing. So there's a lot of companies that will say they're doing something to better themselves, but actually aren't. So that's a big risk in this space, greenwashing.
So you're seeing a lot more interest in this space, though, Mick, with your clients.
Yes,
you, Mick,
and
you definitely have a younger demographic of client generally. Like
yes.
you've got.
So it is the younger demographic that are more interested, but it really comes back to, you know, ethics is such a subjective thing. You know, what I consider ethical may be completely different to you. So when someone says they want to invest ethically, I've really got to delve into what they actually value, what they want to achieve.
I might actually now ask. Let you guys go and leave the couch. I'll thank you, Alastair and Michael, for sitting up here.